Welcome to the NIHR Leeds Biomedical Research Center online seminar series. My name is Yusuf. I'm an associate professor and consultant rheumatologist at University of Leeds. I'm also the BRC emerging lead. So we are organizing this on behalf of the Academic Capacity Development Committee. So this is the second talk of this calendar. Just a few. So before we go with the talk, so I'm just trying to highlight a few ground rules. So everyone has been muted automatically when we set up the meeting. So please don't unmute it. So to ensure that the sounds, everything's all right from the presenter. So just letting you know that we'll do the question and answer at the end of the session. So if you do have any questions, you can type it in the chat during the talk. And after I will be able to read it at the end of the session, but also potentially I may just invite you, just if anything not clear from the question, then you can ask Nick. Other thing as well, just to let you know that we do want to hear from you. So we have a short feedback survey to be done. So after the meeting, my colleague Alison Hunt, who set up the meeting, will then send email to you all. So it will be a short, about 3 minutes questions that you can do it either pressing the link or also through QR code. And then once you fill in the survey, because we want to know, what are the things that went well, and also what are things that could be improved, or what are the future topics that you wanting to be included, so that we can improve this. And once you finish the survey, then you have a nice certificate of attendance. So it's really nice, a token of appreciation. So that will be sent automatically once you finish the survey. Okay, so today, we're delighted to have Nick Sheppard, who is an open research advisor, to enlighten us an important topic pertaining to open access and open research, publication for researchers. So, Nick, thank you for coming, and I'll leave the floor to you.
Thanks, Yus, and thanks for the invitation. And hello, everybody. Nice to be here virtually. So I've got quite a lot to get through. I'll do my best, and obviously we do want to leave a little bit of time for questions. But as Yus says, please do post any questions in the comments. And as I said at the outset, although I'm on the open research side, I know enough, I think, about open access, but it is incredibly complicated. I've got a colleague actually in the room with me who might be able to help me ask any tricky questions. But first of all, I'll just perhaps give you a quick overview of our team, because I know we've got colleagues here, not from beyond the University of Leeds, but I always think this is useful to give colleagues certainly at Leeds, and if you are from elsewhere, so a colleague from Sheffield, and we actually liaise closely with them as well. So we are Research Services. We're under Associate Director Claire Knowles, which is Research and Digital Futures, and we're actually split into two strands. Now, obviously, I'm on the open research side, and we do work closely together, but we've got open research under Sally Dalton, where I sit, and Kika Chukwu, my colleagues online as well with you. She's also an open research advisor on that side, but we've also got research intelligence under Liz Neely. And these are complementary services as well. We don't work independently. On our side, we tend to focus obviously on open access, open and fair data, so that's sharing data. Open platforms, tools and services, open approaches and transparency and public engagement, transparency and things like reproducible research, that kind of things are all covered with open research, so we'll talk a bit about today. Whereas on the other side of the team, they talk about, they cover bibliometrics, so citation analyses, that kind of thing, if you've got any requirements for that, or literature searching. And also raising research visibility. So again, that's, obviously, as it says on the tin, improving the reach and visibility of your research, which obviously interacts also with open research. So we do obviously work together as a team, but I think we're about 25 FTE altogether. So we're quite a big team. We look after various systems, some of which you'll be aware of at Leeds and maybe elsewhere as well. So we have Symplectic, look after Symplectic, the White Rose Research Online Repositories, the White Rose Theses Online Repositories, Research Data Leeds Repositories. We've got two of those, RDL, which is open data, and what we call Radar, which is restricted access data. So again, in perhaps a medical context, there may be data that you can't share openly, but can be shared under controlled conditions. So I can tell you a little bit about that if we've got time, and then things like Scopus and Dimensions, Altmetrics. There's so many different tools out there. So if if you're not sure about any of these, hopefully we can help, or we've got colleagues that can. Altogether, the open research side of things is governed by the Open Research Group, for strategic direction, etc. And that's really just making the point that we're trying to bring together a wide range of stakeholders around this, in terms of information governance, ethics teams, research computing, etc. ODMPL, which is organisational development and professional learning here at Leeds, and research and innovation services, because not one person or service holds everything around open research. So that's an important point to bear in mind in terms of, and actually, the collaborative nature of open research is all part of that as well. So today, as I say, I've got quite a lot of slides. I won't go too long on that one. But what we'll try and get through is to give you a bit of open research context to start off with, because very often what I find increasingly is open research is often seen as synonymous with open access, and open access is obviously an important part of that. We will be talking about that today, but it's much broader than open access to publications, to journal articles. But I will give you an overview of open access and the different kinds of open access, a little bit on the university systems that support open access, a little bit about REF, although that's very quick, and a lot of this will be pointing you off to additional resources. Talk a little bit about rights retention and the research outputs policy. I'd be very interested, before we get into that, if I've just indicated in the chat, I'll be interested to learn to what extent people are familiar with rights retention. Perhaps let me know if you are, or a yes or a no in the chat, because I'm interested to what extent people are aware of it. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Open access funding, and then back to open research in terms of the broader context, and hopefully a little bit of time for some questions. So in terms of open research, this is a definition from the University of Leeds Research Culture Strategic Plan. And it is an important aspect of research culture. And we won't go in too much detail today about the broader research culture, but this definition cites open research practices that strive for collaborative working, sharing, and openness throughout the entire research cycle to enable transparency, reproducibility, and the reduction of inequalities, whilst maximising the reach of our research. So I quite like that sort of quite pithy sort of overview. I told you I've got a small screen here, so I should know it by now, but I quite like the wheel on the right hand side, which refers to open science. At Leeds and in the UK generally, we tend to refer to open research just to be more inclusive of the humanities. Very similar principles apply across all disciplines, in terms of social sciences and different research methodologies, as well as hard science. But I quite like that, which is from UNESCO, actually. It's from a UNESCO report in 2021, I think, which covers different aspects of open research. So, very often with the open access side of things or data, you're thinking about that top green segment, but this also covers other aspects which we'll touch on today, so let's sort of open infrastructure and issues around knowledge equity and different knowledge systems, and trying to be more open, especially in the world that we're living in today. That's all very important. Just to highlight DORA as well, to what extent colleagues are familiar with that, I'm not sure, but that's the Declaration on Research Assessment, and I quite like their tagline as well, which is let's change what we value in research. So this again relates to, for example, not using journal impact factor as a proxy for research quality, and there's all sorts of complex sort of politics and economic considerations around open access and dissemination, and what's incentivized in the academy, that kind of thing, which we'll perhaps touch on as we go on, but obviously we've only got limited time. Start with a few definitions. So we're talking obviously now in terms of open access. We'll come back to the broader open research landscape, but obviously open access refers to making research outputs freely available without legal, financial, or technical barriers to encourage visibility, transparency, and reuse. Again, to what extent you may or may not be familiar with some of the terminology around this. We talk about green and gold open access. We could write a thesis, and many have, around the sort of the developing landscape around open access. But in a nutshell, green open access is predicated on what was the subscription model of access. So historically, we in the academy would be able to access research papers, articles through the subscriptions that our libraries had. But anybody outside the academy wouldn't be able to do so. But green open access is archiving a version of that output into a repository like the White Rose repository, such that everybody can access it. Increasingly now we tend to talk about gold open access, where it's kind of flipped the business model. So rather than subscription models, you're paying to publish an article. very expensive fees very often, but often what that means is those fees are now visible in a way that they weren't previously under subscription. We've always paid an awful lot of money for subscription access. Increasingly now we're paying a lot of money to actually publish research. Obviously an immediate equity issue there. I mentioned knowledge equity, in terms of who can potentially afford to actually publish. Whereas historically they perhaps couldn't afford to actually access research. Diamond Open Access you may have heard of, and doesn't tend to be that common in the STEM disciplines, but this is a developing model, a much more equitable model, whereby journals don't charge either to publish or to read. So that's and tend to be funded by different types of models, more in the humanities. So at Leeds we subscribe to something called the Open Library of the Humanities, for example, which is something that we pay a fee to. It's sort of crowdsourced, if you like. Lots of libraries pay towards it, and that means that they're able to run their journals with no fees to authors or fees to readers. And it's an increasingly popular and more equitable, as I say, route to open access. A repository is a digital system where the content's freely available, like the White Rose repository, and in there you'll find what we call versions of record. So these are papers that are made available through the gold open access model, have been paid to publish, and the green model. So they're very often what we call article and authors accepted manuscripts, or AAM, which is the accepted version of a manuscript that can be made open access where the publisher's version can't. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail as we go. In terms of, as I say, if you do have any questions about this, please get in touch, because it is increasingly complex around how the open access landscape is working. The first thing to point out really is probably what we call our read and publish deals. So again, what I was saying initially, where historically the sector, we've subscribed to have subscription access to journal articles. Increasingly now they're bundled up into what we call read and publish deals. So that means we pay still very high fees to the big commercial publishers, but that enables us to both read that content and also to publish that content. So we've had a large variety of these deals in place as a sector and as a university since 2016. 25 were in place last year in 2024. I've put the cost down there just for information as well, because again, I think a lot of these costs are hidden, and I think it's always valuable to sort of just highlight just how much money this does cost in terms of publishing and accessing the journal articles, which you as academics very often do that labour, and we're not necessarily remunerated for it beyond the contracts that you will be on as part of your academic work. Now, JISC has very recently negotiated. It's just coming into play actually for what we call the big five publishers. So they dominate the market. You'll be familiar with them all, I'm sure. Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, Sage, and Taylor Francis. And again, a few more figures there in terms of the numbers around that. And there's a link there at the bottom for all of the read and publish deals that the university currently has. And as I say, that now it will include the new read and publish deals that have just come into force. Come into effect from January this year. Now, the problem is with open access funding beyond what's covered in those read and publish deals, it's extremely limited, and this is a real problem for the sector as a whole. There are no central funds available to all authors at the University of Leeds. Some universities do, I think. It's something we've discussed, but again, it's just unsustainable, especially in the current economic climate. And again, this leads to equity issues. If you're not funded, for example, postgraduate researchers perhaps haven't access to funds, etc. We do have a block grant from UKRI. Now that's only covers research funded by UKRI, Wellcome Trust, British Heart Foundation, and Cancer Research UK. Many other funds, including NIHR, have their own funding mechanisms. Now, I and my team, and our team here, don't tend to focus on the application stage, but there is information on the NIHR website if you're probably familiar with in terms of applying for those funds. But again, if I can't answer any questions now, colleagues will be able to do so by email, etc. I've already mentioned the publisher agreements and what we call transformative agreements. And again, this is all part of the sector trying to move to full open access in a sustainable academic way. I've also mentioned their monographs and the White Rose University Press. Now, I'm not sure to what extent NIHR funded researchers will do long form publications. I'm guessing perhaps not. But that is an option there if that is something that's required. I can't actually see what that bottom line says. What does it say? I'm just looking at my colleagues. Yeah, so I've got a navigate forward that I can't get rid of over the slide. So often, if people don't have access to funding through these mechanisms, we may say, try your faculty, and obviously increasingly or school, and increasingly they are unlikely to have funds to the tune of several thousand pounds, euros, or dollars, or whatever, in terms of actually publishing. I think the average is, what is it, about 2,500 now? I'm just asking my colleague. 2,500. But if you're publishing in something like Nature, it's £9,000, I think €10,000 to publish one article, which is a research culture issue, should we say, in terms of how the market works in this space. Just to give an overview of the university systems that we have in place to support open access. I'm actually just going to look at the colleague's slide because it's slightly bigger than mine. But you can see there we've got symplectic elements, is sort of what we call our publications management system. You can log into that at symplectic.leeds.ac.uk. All members of the university community will have access to that, and PGR. So that's where all records of research output should go. It's also increasingly linked up with a wider range of external and internal systems. So it harvests records from things like Web of Science, and which we also pay for, by the way, and also owned by Clarivate, or Scopus, which is also owned by Elsevier. That pulls sort of data into this system, but you also need to add your own records for ref compliance, which I'll come onto as well. It's also fed by data from Banner and Crystal. There's a lot of work going on around these infrastructures as well, so we're potentially getting a new funding system. But in essence, everything should and will eventually be in this system, and it's all linked together. And it also feeds out to publications onto your staff profile, and there's work going on around that as well. And you upload your files and all the metadata, etc., goes through the White Rose Research Online repository. We also, in my specific team, in the research data team, we look after the research data Leeds repository, and Radar, the restricted access data repository as well. Though that's not currently integrated with Symplectic, but it will in the future. So just to sort of say that the infrastructure is developing as we go. And if you've got any issues with this, because it can be quite complex, I know, and daunting how it all sort of fits together and works, then please get in touch and we can help you with that. This is an example of a record in the White Rose repository. I've actually used one of my own articles just because Wikipedia is a bit of an interest of mine, especially in the current climate that we're in information space. And this was a research article I did with colleagues at Sheffield and York, actually, the White Rose University repositories, university back in 2021, was it? I can't remember. Looking at the open access coverage of articles cited on Wikipedia, and I think we had about 6,500 articles cited across the 3 universities at that point. Around about 50% of them were open access. And again, I'm interested in public access to internal knowledge and information. If people are actually accessing reading Wikipedia, which may or may not be accurate, that's where you come in as well, potentially to improve that accuracy, especially as this stuff's being used by AI increasingly, etc. And a lot of that could be made open access if it was linked to a repository version, etc. So as a layperson, you want to know more about cancer or whatever it is that you're looking up on Wikipedia. Ideally, you should be able to link through to an open access version of that paper. So that's what we were looking at in this. Just to highlight that article was Diamond. So you can see there it says article processing charges supported by UKSG, which is the journal. So this is an example of a Diamond journal where we didn't have to pay as authors to publish, and nor do people have to pay to publish. This is a record in the White Rose repository, which is the version of record because it's fully open access and licensed under Creative Commons, so we don't need to use the accepted manuscript. And you can see there in the top right my profile, which is the where the publication is fed out onto my staff profile. In terms of ref, and I'm not going to say a huge amount about ref because it's just, I think it's only recently, was it last month? I think the guidance actually came out, or quite recently anyway, that the guidance came out. But and we're still developing guidance around this. But essentially, it applies to journal articles, conference papers. Now, that doesn't mean that we only want you to put those types of materials into Symplectic. We'll get onto that. In terms of open research, we're also interested in software and code, data sets, conference presentations, posters, you name it, your full academic output. But in terms of the ref, it's journal articles and conference papers. So you should upload the accepted manuscript to Symplectic as soon as possible after acceptance, so that the library can make it available in line with REF requirements. And we ask people to do that, I think, even if it is gold open access. I'm just asking my colleague, because Gemma, who works on this more. But the other proviso is that the output must be published with open access as an alternative under Creative Commons, so that's gold or diamond open access. Nevertheless, we do still want that accepted manuscript, and just to make sure that we've got a comprehensive record. There's lots more details and information and guidance on the library website there that you can have a look at in more details, and obviously get in touch with us if you want to ask any specific questions. I'm going to highlight now the research outputs policy. So there's a link there at the bottom to the research outputs policy on the library website. Now, this was recently called until recently the research publications policy, and it's deliberately been changed to research outputs, as I say. This is an open research aspect. You know, we're trying to get away from this idea that journal article is the fait accompli. You know, that's your research in its entirety. What we're really interested in as a university, as a sector, is a much broader range of outputs. You know, everything that goes into that research article, whether that's data or protocols, or there might be pre-registration. I don't know if that's something the colleagues are familiar with, where you outline the methodologies and processes before data collection to mitigate against some questionable research practices. We'll come on to that in a moment as well. So the full range of outputs, that, again, this is a research culture thing that, you know, isn't necessarily monetized by the big commercial publishers in the same way, but it's all very important to research process. But just to emphasize that this has been updated quite recently in 2023 to underpin the university's open research statement, which you can also find online. I haven't put a link to that there. And again, a big part of that is obviously strengthening the university's commitment to the funders' open research requirements, and to raise the profile of the University of Leeds research, and full records of research and institutional outputs, and all the infrastructure that we're continuing to develop around that. And obviously the REF is a big part of that as well. So anything that is crucial that the records at least are in Symplectic. Even if something's gold and out in the wild, we still need the records to be in Symplectic to be eligible for REF. To highlight three specific new, I can still say they're new, I suppose it's 3 years old, but three new author requirements. And these all relate to sort of research culture, or certainly credit taxonomy. Again, to what extent people are familiar with that, I'm not sure, but credit is about identifying contributors in all the roles to contribute to research. So that might be someone like me, for example, as a data curator, or it might be who's written the funding bid, and, you know, trying to really be equitable in terms of who's actually contributed to a given research output, and inclusive. You're also required, and many funders, I'm not sure off the top of my head NIHR, but many funders will require you to, as the university does, to include a data access statement. So that is required whether or not there is any data, or if that data is openly available or not. You should include a data access statement. There is guidance on the university, on the library website, around how to do that. And then retaining rights, as again, I'm not sure if anybody did put in the chat whether or not they are familiar with rights retention, but that is a requirement now of the policy as well, although there's a caveat to that, in that we've actually notified publishers that we are retaining rights as a university, which I'll come on to in a moment. Just to highlight as well that another part of the outputs policy, so it is to acknowledge grant funding, which is also explicitly a requirement of NIHR. I was talking to yours earlier, and he suggested we emphasise that. I was just messing with these slides earlier, and I was a bit busy, but I've just highlighted at the bottom as well that the author affiliation is also important for those read and publish deals. So I just cut this straight out of an email, actually. So essentially, very often it's restricted to the corresponding authors and their contract of employment. So that's a crucial aspect to remember when you are applying for, you know, if you're publishing a journal through one of our read and publish deals, that affiliation is crucial to make sure that you that works smoothly. But again, if you have any problems, get in touch. So rights retention. again, I mean, this sort of gets to the nub of some of these, the historical issues that we've had with the monetization, if you like, of open access. So historically, as I say, we had this subscription model. Then we went to this gold model where people were publishing, paying to publish open access. And then what started to happen, the commercial sector being, driven as it is, quite rationally by the financial model, we started to get what's called hybrid publication. So there we subscribe to a journal, but you can pay extra to have that article also published at gold open access. So that meant what we were getting then was effectively double dipping, it was called. So a journal was increasing their revenue through two strands, through the subscription model and also paying to publish through gold open access. And also they were then restricting access, open access through the green model by imposing an embargo saying, you can't make this open access through a repository for 12 or 18 months or 24 months in some cases, depending. So what rights retention is the sector trying to sort of wrest back a bit of that control. It's a legal mechanism based on copyright and prior license. So it's all been through legal, etc. A lot of universities in the UK and around Europe and the world actually are doing this as well. I don't know the legalese. I'm not going to deal with that, but just to reassure that it has all been through. Harvard were doing this way back in 2008, and it's also a part of Wellcome Trust's strategy as well, and Edinburgh led the way in the UK in 2022. The N8 have a collective statement around rights retention that you can see online, and there's also a list on the library website of all the publishers that we have notified that we'll be doing notification of rights retention. So again, this is just to make sure that we as a university are giving first license to these outputs before that copyright is signed over to a publisher. I suppose the caveat with this is if you are working with any publishers, they will tend to steer you down, a pay to publish model. And that's not necessarily always the case legally. So, if you get into any issues, that gives get in touch. So that's all I'll say on this at the moment, because it is, potentially quite complex, and I'm not an expert by any means. Well, there's just to say that it is it only applies to research articles, reviews, and conference papers, and you still need to include a rights retention statement. And I can't actually read the text there, but if you have a look at the outputs public statement, I mean, essentially we're saying it's still a good idea to include this statement in your submission, but it's only now a should because we have prior notified the publishers that this is what we're doing. So that's all legally sort of watertight. I'll skip over that just for time. I suppose it is just one issue that sometimes comes up is around academic freedom, in terms of people being concerned about limiting where you can publish. Just to, it's an ongoing discussion, but that shouldn't be an issue. And but you may get some pushback from publishers. And if you do, then get in touch, because it's an interesting discussion for us to have. I've also just flagged the NIHR Open Access Publications funding guidance there, which I don't know a huge amount about. As I say, we don't tend to get involved in the library in the application stage. But I just had a quick look myself. They'll cover open access fees through their funding, as I understand. There is a form on the website as well, which I've linked there as well, which I think I've just copied that from the website. And that's from my colleague, Jonathan, who couldn't be here today, but he's just added that caveat that apparently OA funds will remain available to cover open access costs of publication in scope of the policy for up to 2 years after the award or project or contract completion date. So again, please get in touch with us in the library. I've got colleagues like Jonathan who'll know more about these if you have any particular questions. So I'll just pause there. I mean, we're not doing too bad for time. I'm just rattled through all that. So I suppose it might be just worth pausing before I go into a bit more around open research, if there's any particular questions around open access or anything that's confusing, etc. there. I don't know if everybody's been putting stuff in there, and nobody's indicated whether they know rights retention. John's asked, are publication fees usually added to funding application accepted by funders? I think so, through NIHR. I don't know if you'd have any thoughts on that. Yeah, I mean that's this most recent slide, I guess, indicates that that's certainly the case with NIHR. But as I say, we're not necessarily involved with the application side of things in the library. And yours has posted that there as well. Yeah, yours. Do you want to come in?
Yes, so just to add, yeah, so thanks, Nick. So basically, it all depends on your funders. So basically, they all have different policies. So it's better to check when you're trying to submit an application, whether is this a fellowship or any project grants or anything, just to check about their policy. So certainly things evolve over time. So from the perspective of NIHR, they used to ask you to put in a budget, but since June 2022, so you no longer need to put that on the open access cost, because you can ask for the open access, funding during and throughout your grant or award up until 2 years, like what Nick was mentioning earlier. Sometimes it can be extended to 5, but then that's you have to have a really case by case basis application. But usually you can use the access up to 2 years. So yeah, so some funders put say don't put. So the best thing to do is when you apply for things, just to look at the guidance, and then just to inquire whether you need to put the publication fees or not on your application form. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yours, that's helpful. And as I say, I've got a long email from Jonathan because I was, he, as I say, he's more expert in this area than I am. So if you do have any questions, do get in touch. I'll just pause for a moment. We're only at 1 o'clock. If is there anything else that's sort of arisen from the open access side of things? I hope I'm not talking too fast. I do have a habit of sort of gabbling on. So I hope that made sense. John said he hadn't seen the guidance application form, so yeah, that's helpful. Okay, so that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of many of the issues of open access, and trying to, what I'm really interested in doing, I suppose, in the context of open research more generally, and referring to these issues of research culture and the costs involved, is historically, as we in the library, I think, have tended to harp on about compliance, which is obviously important, rep compliance and funder compliance, etc. But I suppose the real question for me is, why are we doing this? What's the value of open access? And really trying to get people to think about those issues in terms of not being sort of just hit with that compliance stick all the time. And that's kind of where the broader issues of open access, of open research come into play. So these are some examples of open research practices beyond open access. So I already mentioned pre-registration. So again, I sometimes it's difficult for me in these areas because I'm not academic, and I work with academic colleagues on some of these things, and it varies very much in different disciplines. And a big challenge for us in the library is that I'm a layperson, effectively. I'm talking to medics, or the next time, another day, I'll be talking to chemists or to physicists or to social scientists, all of which have related practices but often different. So I suppose it's a call to you as well, as much as anything, as colleagues, in terms of to help us to understand and work with a particular discipline or research methodology in terms of what actually makes sense in terms of open practice in a particular discipline. So as I say, pre-registration is very common in the social sciences. I think there are examples of registration that I couldn't speak to in terms of medical. I'm sure colleagues on the call will know this stuff as well. But we also talk a lot about open education. Increasingly, sometimes the sort of open education side of things isn't linked up as well with the open research side of things, I think, and making openly available material open available can help with open education as well. Already touched on sort of FAIR data. So again, I'm throwing away that around that acronym. I'm not sure to what extent people are familiar with FAIR, which stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, but not necessarily open. So open data should be fair, but fair data is not necessarily open, but it is findable and accessible under certain conditions, for example, through the Radar repository. And again, we're doing a lot of work at the university around research data governance, in terms of working with ethics and making sure consent's in place and that kind of thing, such that, data can be shared as openly as possible, as closed as necessary, but not necessarily fully open, or very often that can't be the case. And actually, sometimes the very word open, I think, can be problematic in that context because, people say, well, I can't share my material openly, it's about patient data or whatever, but that doesn't mean that you can't share something or it can't be shared in certain ways. We've already obviously talked about open access publications, and also an increasing area of interest, I suppose. Now, again, I'm always really interested in different cultures around, academic cultures around preprints, which is putting up a version of an article prior to formal peer review, and there's a lot of innovation there as well around open peer review, this kind of thing. Striking statistic from the pandemic, actually, on medRxiv, which is the medically for the medical preprint server. Submissions to medRxiv, i.e. preprints, went up 700% in the first 6 months of the pandemic in 2020 compared to the previous 6 months, because obviously there was a lot of emphasis on quick turnaround of science. Now that was good in a lot of ways, but it also had limitations. I don't know if you, I don't want to mention who, especially given current circumstances, but hydroxychloroquine was touted as a miracle cure for COVID by who in Trump. Which actually came from a preprint, I think, and it was debunked, but of course once it's got into the public domain, etc. But I think it also made it through peer review in the Lancet. So again, it's just thinking about how these things sort of work in the broader information ecosystem. In terms of why open research is important, now again, I'm going to have to look at my colleague's screen because I can't see the tiny little one on mine. So this is, again, it comes from a more social science perspective, but it's quite, to what extent, I'd be very interested to hear to what extent it is relevant to colleagues on this call, for example. So this addresses various culture issues as well. So pre-registration, for example, is intended to mitigate what's often referred to as QRPs, or questionable research practices, which may not necessarily be deliberate, but it's been shown in a wide range of disciplines, including medicine and certainly psychology, I think is where it started, that an awful lot of papers, alarmingly high numbers of papers, can't be independently reproduced. Now, sharing data is part of that, but also, cherry picking data, this kind of thing. And again, this is partly tied in with the incentives to publish novel research outputs, etc. And again, that's something that pre-registration helped with, increasingly registered reports, which is a form of pre-registration. A journal will potentially accept a proposal based on that registered report and publish it, whether or not you find a positive result, for example. So there's, these are all sorts of cultural issues that are addressed by open research. P-hacking as well, so that's something that would be specified. And again, to what extent, I'm not a statistician, I'm not sure to what extent you use statistics in your own research, but P-hacking refers to potentially running different types of statistical analyses until you get a positive result. Maybe not so, obviously as that, it can be, again, the incentives to actually make positive results, and the fact that many journals won't typically, there is a premium on positive results. So these are some of the issues that we're trying to address through open research. Picture of me though, that's from an article that we wrote for Central Comms, which is linked there. So, and again, this cuts to, for me, to about what open research and what are universities for. It's not obviously it's important for people's careers, etc. But we're really trying to encourage, to have an impact on the world, as that comment from Nick Plant illustrates there. Values-driven university committed to fostering open research to achieve our mission to advance knowledge, transform lives, and shape a better future for our communities, our region, and the world. So in terms of our advocacy around open research, we launched something called the Open Research Hub, last November 2024. We're just reviewing that at the moment, actually, but do have a look and tell us to what extent it sort of maps the research life cycle. And you should be able to find out. I've got some slides on it in a moment as well. And we're also working with the DORIs, the Directors of Research and Innovation, as open research champions. So again, this is this issue where, as essentially a layperson, I've got a bachelor's degree in English, so I can read. That's my kind of skill. In terms of actually working with the DORIs and trying to understand what the the issues are in a particular discipline or research methodology. So Kikuchuku, my colleagues on the call as well, and I have been working with the Dories on developing resources, that kind of thing. So at the moment, you'll perhaps find that the Open Research Hub is a bit generic, and our next phase is to try and develop more specific resources for medical research, for example, or whatever it may be, social sciences. Or we're probably going to try and take a research methodology approach, because what we're finding in a given school, the research methodologies cover everything from, hardcore STEM right through to social sciences, even arts and humanities practice research. There's a wide range of different methodologies within a different discipline. So I think research methodology approach might be more fruitful than a school level approach. But if you have a look at the research Hub, you'll see that it is split into those 6 areas. And for example, there's also a page there on tools and resources to support open practice. And again, that's fairly generic. If there are any specific tools that you use, do let us know, because again, that's kind of out of my head, and I'm not sure to what extent it reflects specific disciplines, etc. So feedback's always very welcome. We are reviewing that, as I say, as we speak. I did mention knowledge equity. So we have something co-founded at the University of Leeds called the Knowledge Equity Network, and this is really about collaboration in the areas of open research and open education, and really addressing some of these inequalities. We know what a fraught sort of global landscape we're living in politically and geopolitically and all these kinds of things at the moment. I've already mentioned the APC model of open access is an obvious example, whereby historically perhaps colleagues in the global south, say, wouldn't be able to afford to publish research, wouldn't be able to afford to access research behind a paywall. Increasingly now they can't potentially afford to actually publish research. So different problem. Equity is still an issue. We've been doing an awful lot of work with Wikimedia now. I think I'm just fascinated in this area. So, for example, if I don't know what your specialisms are on the core, but if I Google one of them, chances are I'm going to either land on the Wikipedia article or increasingly get an AI summary, which itself may be drawn from the Wikipedia article. So obviously we've got a lot of expertise within the academy, and we're trying to encourage colleagues to actually improve Wikipedia articles. I had a colleague got in touch actually last week from the School of Medicine, who'd noticed she was submitting a bid to a fund, to MRC, I think. And she'd, whatever subject it was, I can't remember, it was some dental problem. She'd looked at the Wikipedia article and said it's wrong, and she's been speaking to colleagues and they've been quoting figures from this article. I want to correct it, I want to improve it. So we'll support her to do that kind of thing. The NIHR actually got a background in doing this kind of thing, so they had what's called a Wikimedian in residence for a time. It's now discontinued, but that's a blog post by Adam, who I know as well. He's actually now has a similar role at London School of Economics, not in a medical context, but a similar role for the London School of Economics. And we also have a Wikimedian in residence here, my colleague Dr. Lucy Hinney, who can support colleagues with this kind of thing as well. So if you're interested in that, please do get in touch. Lots of interesting stuff there. We've been doing translation events and translating into different Wikipedias in different languages, that kind of thing. I've been talking quite a lot. I know Holly's on the line. I don't want to put you on the spot, Holly. If you don't want to say anything, that's fine. But we've been talking recently, haven't we, about plain English summaries, which I know the NIHR do advocate. And again, it's an area that I'm really interested in. I suppose it's akin in some ways to the Wikipedia example. Actually, I can't hope to understand some of the technical language in some of the research I'm sure that you're publishing, but I could probably understand it if it was dumbed down a bit. Well, not dumbed down, that's the wrong word, but simplified in terms of plain English summaries. So do you want to say anything, Holly, or shall I just rattle on?
Yeah, I can do. On this, can you hear me all right? Yeah, fab. I think in terms of plain English summaries, some of the best guidance out there is the NIHR guidance, which is very comprehensive. Another tool that I really recommend using for writing plain English summaries is the Hemingway app. That you might have heard of tools that assess something's reading age, and for plain English summaries we're generally trying to aim for age sort of 7 to 8, which is the same as a tabloid newspaper. But the Hemingway app, I think, provides an additional level. It doesn't just give you a reading age, but it actually sort of scrutinizes the text and shows you exactly where words are too complex, where sentences are too convoluted. So you can really examine where a plain English summary is, you know, is not up to scratch. And generally you want your plain English summary to be understandable to non-specialists of all different kind of educational backgrounds. So just to be as broadly accessible as possible. Because if you're submitting a grant application, you won't necessarily know who those public reviewers are who would review that based on the plain English summary. They public reviewers can again be from all different sort of backgrounds, or even other people on research funding panels who might not know your area of expertise. And I think it's really important for understanding a full application that plain English summary is as clear as possible. But also plain English summaries can be used in other ways as well, so it can help with the discoverability of your research. I think in terms of ensuring that it is in accessible language, it's great to get external perspective. So ask someone outside of your field or members of the public to review it. And obviously, a strong summary will help diverse audiences understand your research. Yeah, if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or also, if you'd like any support through the Research Support Service with your research, I can provide support on both plain English summaries and patient and public involvement, as I'm a PPI advisor with the service.
That's great. Thanks, Holly. And you know, this is a good example, I suppose, of, you know, we've really emphasised sort of collaboration through open research, and Holly and I and another colleague, and we're talking the other week around plain English summaries because it was interesting to us. But obviously, Holly works in a different part of the university, so we are running. I've just posted the link there. One of what we call our open lunch webinars. So because it's such a big subject, open lunch, you know, we've open research, we've got loads of different events. So this is an event specifically around plain language summaries that Holly's very kindly speaking at next week with another colleague, Alice Howarth, who is from the University of Liverpool. So please do register for that and come along if you're interested. The open lunch webinars we try to run once every month or so. They are open to the community, as I know this is. So, you know, if you are not from Leeds, you're very welcome. I've just listed some of the links there. I mean, they should work actually to link through, or there's so essentially we record them all and we put them on the blog with a bit of a blog post, etc. So you see there's one there on right retention, which we've just touched on. There's one on where that second one, open to collaboration, that was like a quick fire event where all of my colleagues that presented at the beginning, so all those different colleagues, I think we had about 12 different colleagues all speaking to the types of support they can give. So if you're interested in that, do have a look at the blog. Or, for example, there I've highlighted one that we did with the Knowledge Equity Network on global biases in research metrics and some of the problems that the broader culture around research metrics can lead to in terms of knowledge equity, for example. I've already highlighted the clear and simple community research to everyone that Holly's speaking at next week. And there's another one, actually there's a third one that's not on there yet, but Peer Community In is an interesting initiative as well. So this is PCI, and how basically it's an open peer review platform that the University of Leeds supports financially. So again, you're very welcome to come along to that on the 29th of April and keep your eye out for any future events. And as I say, the archive is available on the library blog as well. Got various other initiatives. So we also have a podcast, the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, which covers different aspects of research culture. I contribute to that with about 7 or 8 different colleagues now. There's research impacts covered on there. I tend to talk about open research, as you might expect. I've got other colleagues that talk about research careers, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested, if you want to come on the podcast, give us a shout. And, you know, we're really just trying to build a bit of community and sort of discussion around some of these different issues. So, yeah, I think that's hopefully that's given you some idea of what it's all about, and hopefully that was of some use. And we do have a few minutes for any discussion if people are interested.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick, and also Holly. for the tour of the topic, from the first diagram of open science, to the type of open access that you can publish, the guidance, and also why do we need to publish in open access. So I think why do we make it open research? I think that's really helpful for us. So I'm just opening the question to the members of the floor. If anyone have questions, I've got a few questions, but I thought we'd just let people, who are attendees first. If you have any questions to Nick, I'm happy for you to be unmuted if you want to ask like that. If not, I probably have just got a few just trying to for clarification, if that's all right, Nick.
Yeah.
So because Symplectic has been used by quite major institutes in the UK and also some other areas as well. So just letting you know, when we submit, when we deposit our publication in the Symplectic, do they then go automatically to the open repository, like the White Rose that we use currently, or do we also have to deposit that ourselves there, or actually all interlink? Someone else have done it for us or something? Yeah.
No, that's essentially you do need to do it yourself. So what we're talking about is that accepted manuscript. And this is what I was sort of getting at the beginning, because it is complicated. There are actually, if it is published gold open access and fully open access, then there are ways, I think, that the system can find that and do it automatically. But there's a team within the library that will manage that and support that. So if you go, I could even show you now. Again, to what extent people are familiar with it, I'm not sure, but hang on. Because and we're very happy to do sessions on Symplectic. Can you see Symplectic now on my screen?
Yeah.
So obviously these are my outputs here. Now, if I look at these are just what we call metadata records. So there's not necessarily a file associated with them. Now, this is the one I showed before. Now, to make matters more complicated, I did show you a version in the White Rose repository, but I didn't deposit that. That was from Sheffield because it's a joint repository. So here you see there's no deposit there. If I wanted to upload a version of that, then I would just click the deposit button. There's a bit of information there. I would select the file on my machine, and then I would upload that file to Symplectic. That would then go into a holding area where my colleagues in the library would then process that and make that openly available in the White Rose repository, as I showed you before. So yeah, you do essentially need to do it yourself.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so we do it here, but then after that, one of the member of the libraries will, put that on the White Rose. We don't have to do two separately.
No, we'll do that. Yeah. So because we need to check we need to check the copyright, etc. But you do need to upload that file, and it's not disappeared. It's come to us, and we've got access to it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, they are linked. They are linked through. So
brilliant. Yeah, just checking. I think one of your diagram earlier as well, you mentioned about the Symplectic. I think there's a sort of broken line like for preprints. So do you also include preprint in the Symplectic or?
Yes, now that is a good question. So there is an item type for preprint. So you could even use White Rose Research Online as a preprint server. You could upload a preprint to White Rose that's not living anywhere else. Now, without boring you with the whys and wherefores of how the infrastructure works, there are some of the tools that are used by that are harvested into the system do have preprints. So there's something called Dimensions, which is a really useful database. Now that does index preprints, and it is a source for Symplectic. So preprints may come into the system through those systems. Or Scopus, I think, has some preprint servers, but there's so many preprint servers, and again, it shows the fragmentation of the landscape. But ideally, we would advocate, getting your preprints into Symplectic as well, even if it's just a record that points off to that preprint on the preprint server. But you could use it in its own right as a preprint server. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sure. So last question from me, while waiting in case other people have questions, it's regarding to like future direction. So as we know that we talk about all this, like, the importance of open research so that we can communicate our science or our work better to everyone else, and also trying to be as inclusive as possible. You talk about, these days, like a lot of journal ask for lay summaries, which is quite useful for lay readers. So in the future, I'm thinking like now, even there's quite a lot of like ways how people can illustrate their impacts. So people start using like art, some videos, and infographic, like short 2-3 minutes video and thing. Do you think in the future is there any move like potentially, if someone produced that as their outputs, whether do they, there's a way where the central the university or institute can, deposit that as well, so that that can be, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and that's why I was trying to emphasize, the fact that we call it research outputs policy, and there's challenges as well for us, I think, because we're working with colleagues in the arts and humanities who are producing practice research. They're producing videos, they're producing all sorts of different non-textual outputs, and we're always trying to figure out how to manage those. So I personally, and I think we'd be very interested in exploring those types of example as well. If people are exploring different ways of expressing their research and talking about their research in whether it's video or audio or whatever it is, podcasts, they could all go in symplectic. Really, it's trying to get people to think beyond that sort of journal article, and that's the research, because it isn't, obviously it's important, and that's the peer-reviewed research output, but there's so much more that can be done around that. And yes, we would like to store it, resources allowing, and obviously the infrastructure allowing. But yeah, these types of things we're very much keen to explore.
Right, okay, brilliant. So there's a last question by John there. So is there an open access route for non-research, for example, like service development studies?
Good question. I would say so. Again, I suppose I'm not totally sure I understand the question, but we can publish all types of output. So if it was I don't know, a case study or something around a service development, or you increasingly use symplectic to, what are the other modules called? Where professional activities. There's a professional activities module that you can record in there. So I don't know, John, we can give DOIs to everything. So very often in the library, we're obsessed with DOIs, digital object identifiers. I think I'll be familiar with the DOI, which is this string of numbers. Now we allocate those. We have an account with the British Library and what's called DataSite to allocate DOIs. We can give one of those to anything within reason. So that could be a report, and it could be something about a service development. So there will be ways. I'd be interested to touch in a bit more detail, John, if I don't necessarily quite understand the question as posed.
Okay, brilliant. So I think we're gonna close the meeting. So thank you, Nick, and also Holly, for enlightening us about this important subject. I'm sure there's more things that can be explored in the future. Things change. Like I say, I've learned so much as well with all this Wikiman and everything. So I think it's really, really fascinating, time that we're living in. Sorry, I think there's one last point.
Yes, is the short answer, Susan. Perhaps we've run out of time now, but there's all sorts of different ways that we can do that, either from the repositories or, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've got a bibliometric service. Perhaps drop me or our email. Shall I just put my email in there? I think it was at the beginning anyway, but you're very welcome to drop me a line, and I can give you some sort of pointers on that as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. And so thank you everyone as well for tuning in today. Just to remind again that my colleague Alison will send everyone through the email that you can use the link, or also through the QR code, so that you can help us filling this survey. It only takes about 3 minutes for us to improve the lecture, and also what you want in the future. And by clicking that online, you just get nice certificates of attendance automatically after that. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining, and then have a nice day, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, yours. Bye-bye.